In the winter of 1942, as the flames of war spread across Europe and the Pacific, a quiet revolution began in Washington. Hidden in the corridors of the old War Department building, a new kind of weapon was being forged. Not a machine or a bomb, but an organization built on secrecy, deception, and courage. It was called the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, the United States' first centralized intelligence agency and the forerunner of the CIA. Its task: to gather intelligence, sabotage enemy operations, and support resistance movements across occupied territories. Its operatives were scholars, linguists, athletes, and adventurers, ordinary men and women who would be asked to do extraordinary things in the shadows of World War II. The OSS was the brainchild of General William Wild Bill Donovan, a decorated hero of the First World War and a visionary who believed that America's strength must extend beyond the battlefield. "We will need a corps of quiet professionals," Donovan declared. "Men who can operate unseen, who can think like the enemy, and strike where least expected." From that idea grew an organization that trained in remote camps across the United States, at Congressional Country Club in Maryland, in the woods of Virginia, and along the beaches of Catalina Island. Here, agents learned the dark arts of espionage, lockpicking, demolition, unarmed combat, and how to kill silently with a knife or garrote. By 1943, OSS teams were being parachuted into every corner of Europe and Asia. But unlike regular soldiers, they carried no guarantee of return. Theirs was a world of coded transmissions, forged identities, and one-way missions. If captured, one field manual warned, you will not be recognized as a soldier. You will be an enemy spy. The danger was ever present, and the price of failure was often death, or worse, disappearance into the endless silence of occupied Europe. Among the earliest of these missions were operations in France, Norway, and Burma, campaigns meant to cripple Axis supply lines and prepare the ground for Allied offensives. Each one was a test of human endurance, played out in the frozen mountains, dense jungles, and bombed-out cities of a world at war. In Norway, teams of American commandos trained by the OSS and the Norwegian resistance were tasked with halting German troop movements by destroying vital rail infrastructure. In France, mixed OSS SOE teams slipped across enemy lines to coordinate with the Maquis, transmitting coded reports to London. In the jungles of Asia, other units vanished completely into the green abyss, their fates unknown for decades. It was an era when even a single radio message could turn the tide of battle, or expose an entire network to the enemy. The OSS operated under extreme pressure, balancing the necessity of speed with the danger of compromise. A misheard word or a missed code phrase could mean discovery and death. Yet for many operatives, the thrill of serving in absolute secrecy outweighed the risk. "We fought a war without uniforms," wrote one veteran, "where trust was our only weapon." Despite the glamour that post-war films and novels later attached to espionage, the reality was often brutal. Missions were improvised, resources scarce, and intelligence unreliable. Some operations succeeded brilliantly, such as the coordination of resistance movements before D-Day, but others ended in catastrophe. The nature of secret warfare meant that many of these tragedies remained unknown, buried in classified archives and whispered about in the corridors of intelligence agencies. Even within the OSS, many of the dead and missing were never officially accounted for. Files were sealed, missions erased, names redacted, as General Donovan himself admitted near the end of the war. "Our victories will be silent, our losses unknown. For every operation that became legend, there were 5 that ended in silence. Missions lost to time, their participants forgotten by history. Yet their efforts, often unrecorded, were part of the unseen foundation on which Allied victory was built." As the war entered its final years, the OSS faced its greatest tests. The stakes grew higher, the missions riskier, and the outcomes more tragic. The operatives who ventured into occupied Europe and Asia in those closing months knew they were facing impossible odds. Many would never return, and their missions would vanish from the record, sometimes intentionally, to conceal failure or protect surviving agents. This is their story, the untold chronicles of the 5 most tragic OSS operations that ended in silence. Across the frozen heights of Norway, the occupied villages of France, the rugged coasts of Italy, and the endless jungles of Burma, these missions share a common fate, a blend of bravery and disappearance, heroism and heartbreak. Each began with purpose and ended in mystery, their echoes still heard in the declassified reports and recovered fragments of war diaries decades later. In the shadows of global conflict, the OSS waged a war few would ever know, and though their operations were cloaked in silence, their sacrifices speak louder than any victory parade. The first of these stories begins high in the Norwegian mountains, where snow and secrecy would consume an entire team of men whose mission was too dangerous to survive and too important to be forgotten. It was March 1945, barely weeks before the fall of Nazi Germany, when a team of American commandos parachuted into the icy wilderness of central Norway. Their mission, codenamed Operation Ripe, was among the last and most perilous OSS operations in Europe. Deep in enemy-held territory, their task was to sabotage the Nordland Railway, one of the Germans' final lifelines for retreating troops moving north toward Trondheim. The snow was deep, the air thin, and the enemy everywhere. At the head of the mission stood Major William E. Colby, a 25-year-old officer whose quiet confidence would later define his career as director of the CIA. But in March 1945, Colby was not thinking of history, only survival. The men of Ripe belonged to the OSS Special Operations Detachment, codenamed Norso Group. Trained in demolition, survival, and guerrilla tactics, they were among the few Americans to operate on Scandinavian soil. Their orders were clear: destroy critical railway bridges and tunnels to prevent German reinforcements from reaching northern Norway, where they could make a last stand. Yet from the moment their C-47 transport lifted off from Scotland, things began to go wrong. A blizzard swept across the Norwegian mountains, scattering the formation. One plane, burdened with men and supplies, vanished completely, its wreckage not discovered until decades later. Another dropped its team miles from the intended landing zone. Those who survived the jump found themselves waist-deep in snow, miles from any settlement, with temperatures plunging below zero. The landscape was beautiful but unforgiving, a white desert stretching to the horizon, watched by German patrols and collaborators. Colby and his men regrouped near the frozen lake of Snøsavatnet, setting up a base in an abandoned hunting lodge. Their radios crackled sporadically with faint signals from London. "Proceed with caution," came one transmission. "Enemy movements increasing." The Norwegians in the region, members of the local resistance known as Milorg, provided shelter and guides, but German forces were tightening their control. Every day that passed increased the risk of discovery. Despite the setbacks, Ripe went to work. The men carried explosive charges through snowdrifts and across frozen rivers to reach the Nordland rail line. On March 24th, after days of reconnaissance, they struck. The explosions shattered the silence of the night as two key bridges near Tangen were destroyed, severing German supply routes. For a brief moment, it seemed the mission was a success. But in war, silence can be more dangerous than sound. When German patrols arrived to investigate, they found the tracks littered with twisted steel and the remnants of parachutes. They began scouring the surrounding valleys, while Colby's team, cut off from radio contact, struggled to move south towards Sweden for extraction. Snow blindness, frostbite, and exhaustion took their toll. One man's diary, later recovered, described the ordeal. "The snow never ends. The cold eats through the boots. Every sound could be the enemy." Then communication with London ceased entirely. Allied headquarters received no further word from Ripe. For weeks, their fate remained unknown. Some OSS officers believed the team had been wiped out. Others thought they were in hiding, waiting for pickup. It was only months later, after Germany's surrender, that fragments of the truth emerged. A few survivors, emaciated and frostbitten, stumbled across the Swedish border. They told of men lost in avalanches, of supply drops that vanished in storms, and of German patrols that came too close for comfort. The mission had succeeded tactically. The bridges remained destroyed, but at a terrible cost. When historians later examined OSS records, they found large gaps in the operational logs. Equipment lists ended abruptly. Personnel rosters contained names crossed out without explanation. Even Major Colby, in his post-war memoirs, admitted that the record of Ripe was written more in snow and silence than in ink. Some of the men who vanished were never recovered, their remains buried under decades of shifting ice. The missing C-47 transport was found in 2010, still entombed in the mountains, its crew frozen in time. The operation stands as a haunting example of the hazards of wartime secrecy. Unlike the grand offensives of Normandy or the Battle of the Bulge, Ripe was conducted in isolation, its participants unknown to the public, its outcome scarcely noted in official reports. Yet it was precisely these invisible struggles, small teams fighting unseen battles, that helped shape the final Allied victory. Modern military historians often study WWII as both a triumph of courage and a cautionary tale. It revealed the limits of communication and coordination in the age before satellite navigation, where weather and terrain could defeat even the best-trained soldiers. It also underscored the moral strength of those who faced the impossible. As one surviving operative wrote years later, "We were sent to vanish. The silence was part of the job." Operation WWII ended not with a parade or a headline, but with a whisper. One of many OSS missions that slipped into history's shadows. Its ghosts linger still among Norway's frozen lakes and snowbound forests, where echoes of distant explosions fade into the wind. The next OSS mission, launched months earlier in the heart of occupied France, would face a different fate, but end in the same chilling silence. Spring 1944. The Allied invasion of France was imminent, yet shrouded in secrecy. Every bridge, road, and rail line across northern France was crucial to the coming operation, codenamed Overlord. But the Allies needed more than maps. They needed eyes on the ground. For that, the Office of Strategic Services and Britain's Special Operations executive turned to one of the most daring intelligence efforts of the war, Operation Sussex. Operation Sussex was unlike most covert missions of its time. Instead of sabotage or direct combat, its agents were sent into occupied France to gather real-time intelligence on German troop movements, coastal defences, and fortifications. They were to radio back precise data that would guide Allied planners preparing for D-Day. Between March and May of 1944, over 50 small two-man teams parachuted into the heart of occupied France. Young men and women trained to live unseen among civilians, blending in as locals, all while transmitting intelligence that could change the course of the war. The Sussex teams were recruited from across the Allied world: Americans, Britons, Free French, and even a few Canadians. Each pair had their own radio, a set of codes, and enough courage to face certain death if captured. One such team was dropped near Chartres in late April 1944. Their mission was to map German artillery positions that threatened the inland approach from Normandy. They landed at night, their parachutes ghostly white against the dark fields below. The moment they touched ground, they cut their chutes, buried them, and moved quickly toward a prearranged safe house. For 3 nights, they sent coded bursts of intelligence to London, distances measured, coordinates relayed, all under the nose of the Gestapo. Then, on the 4th night, silence. When headquarters in London received no signal at the appointed time, they tried again, different frequency, different code phrase. Nothing. Within days, reports filtered in from the French resistance. The Gestapo had raided several barns and safe houses near Chartres. A local farmer, suspected of helping the Allies, had been executed in public. No word came of the Sussex team. They had vanished. Historians now believe the team's transmitter may have been intercepted by German direction-finding units, a constant danger for Allied spies. The Germans, skilled in radio triangulation, could locate a transmission within minutes. Once a location was fixed, SS units descended swiftly and without mercy. Captured agents were rarely kept alive. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, often tortured prisoners to extract information about other networks, then erased every trace of their existence. Operation Sussex continued despite these losses. Teams across France relayed thousands of intelligence reports in the weeks leading up to D-Day. They tracked panzer movements from Paris toward Normandy, documented the retreat of units from Brittany, and monitored railway repairs sabotaged by the resistance. The flow of information was invaluable, but the cost was measured in lives. Dozens of teams simply disappeared, leaving only cryptic last messages in OSS archives. Signal ceased 3 May, or no further contact after drop. In one OSS memo, dated June 7, 1944, just a day after D-Day, a line appears under losses. Team Chartres presumed captured. No recovery possible, nothing more. No names, no graves, just silence. When the war ended, investigators combed Gestapo records in Paris and Tours. Some fragments emerged, prison registers, interrogation notes, but most evidence was destroyed as the Germans fled. Families of the missing received only brief letters from OSS headquarters. Your son served with distinction. His final mission remains classified. Years later, declassified reports revealed the immense value of the Sussex program. Allied command estimated that 80% of all intelligence used for Overlord's ground operations in northern France came from Sussex sources. Their success came not from force, but from silence, from men and women who risked everything to speak a few words into the ether. Still, for every successful transmission, there were others that ended abruptly. Voices cut off mid-message, static drowning out their final words. The last signal from the Chartres team contained a chilling phrase: "Movement detected west. They are here." The transmission stopped mid-sentence. No one ever found the bodies of those agents. The fields they landed in are now quiet farmland again, dotted with wildflowers and the remnants of war, rusted shell casings, buried parachute cords, fragments of radios. Locals still tell stories of mysterious Allied ghosts who fell from the sky that spring, helped by villagers, then vanished without a trace. For the OSS and SOE, these disappearances were a painful but accepted reality. Each agent knew capture meant no rescue, no recognition, no name on a headstone. As one officer later remarked, "We asked them to disappear, and they obeyed." The Sussex mission remains one of the most effective and most costly intelligence operations of the war. Yet questions linger. Were some Sussex teams betrayed by double agents within the resistance? Did German counterintelligence infiltrate their radio networks? Or were they simply overwhelmed by the crushing efficiency of the Nazi security apparatus? The truth may lie buried in sealed archives or beneath the soil of France itself. What is certain is this: without the intelligence gathered by Operation Sussex, the Normandy invasion might have faced far greater losses. And without the courage of those who never returned, the Allies might have landed blind. Their silence bought victory, but at a price that can never truly be measured. As the Allies advanced deeper into Europe and the tide of war turned, the OSS prepared for new missions in Italy. Missions just as daring, but even more tragic. One, known as Operation Ginny the Queue, would test the limits of military law, morality, and humanity itself. Its end would echo through war crimes trials for years to come. Italy, early 1944. The Allied advance had stalled north of Rome. German forces held the rugged terrain of the Ligurian coast, using a network of fortified tunnels and railways to move men and supplies swiftly across the front. Cutting those lines could cripple their defenses, but it would require precision, deception, and the courage to move unseen behind enemy lines. Out of this desperate need was born one of the OSS's most tragic operations, Ginny II. Operation Ginny II was a sequel to an earlier failed attempt, Ginny WWII, which had been aborted after rough seas and navigational errors left the commandos adrift. Undeterred, the OSS planned a second strike. The target, 2 railway tunnels near Framura and Bonassola, critical to German logistics along Italy's western coast. Destroying them would sever the vital link between La Spezia and Genoa, halting troop reinforcements to the Gothic line. 25-year-old Captain John L. Murphy, a quiet, resolute officer from the US Army's 26th and 77th OSS Regiment, was chosen to lead the mission. He handpicked 14 men, most of them Italian-speaking Americans familiar with the region's dialects. They trained for weeks along the Tyrrhenian coastline, practicing stealth landings, demolitions, and radio communication. Their orders were explicit: land covertly by rubber boat, plant time charges in the tunnels, and escape by sea before dawn. On the night of March 22, 1944, under a moonless sky, the men of Ginny II set out from Corsica aboard the submarine USS Grunion. As they neared the Italian coast, they transferred to rubber boats, rowing silently through the cold surf. But fate once again turned against them. Strong currents and faulty navigation pushed the teams nearly 2 miles off course. Instead of landing near Bonassola as planned, they came ashore near Framura, right beneath the eyes of a German coastal patrol. By dawn, the men realized their mistake. They buried their explosives in the sand, hoping to relocate later under cover of darkness. But before they could regroup, Italian fascist militiamen spotted them moving through the rocky hills. The alarm spread quickly. German troops from the 135th Fortress Brigade converged on the area, combing the coastline for intruders. After a brief firefight, all 15 OSS commandos were captured. Their equipment, uniforms, maps, and demolition gear, was seized intact. Under the laws of war, these men should have been treated as prisoners of war. They wore US uniforms, carried military identification, and were operating under orders. But the German commander in the region, General Anton Dostler, viewed them as spies and saboteurs. He reported their capture to higher command, where the decision was made, by direct order, to execute them. For 2 days, the prisoners were held in a small coastal village near La Spezia. They were interrogated, denied food, and refused the right to contact the Red Cross. When Captain Murphy protested, he was told bluntly, "You are not soldiers, you are bandits." On March 26, 1944, before sunrise, the 15 men were led to a clearing near Punta Bianca. Their hands were tied behind their backs. Each stood before a wooden post marked with a white X. A firing squad of German soldiers awaited. Eyewitnesses later recalled that Captain Murphy asked to speak before the execution. His words were brief. "We are American soldiers. You will answer for this." At 8:15 a.m., the rifles fired in unison. The bodies were buried hastily in shallow graves by the beach, the scene concealed from locals. For the OSS, no word of Ginny 2's fate reached headquarters. The men were simply listed as missing in action. Their mission file was marked closed. No further intelligence. It was not until 1945, after Germany's surrender, that Allied investigators uncovered the truth. In the ruins of German headquarters at La Spezia, documents were found. Typed orders bearing General Dostler's signature, confirming the execution of the OSS team. The evidence was damning. Dostler was arrested and tried by an American military tribunal in Rome in October 1945. The Ginny 2 case became one of the first war crimes trials of the post-war era. When confronted with the execution orders, Dostler claimed he had acted under the Führer Directive of 1942, which demanded that all enemy commandos be shot immediately, even if in uniform. The tribunal rejected his defense. On December 1, 1945, General Anton Dostler was executed by firing squad, the same punishment he had inflicted on Murphy's men. The trial set a critical precedent. Obeying unlawful orders was not a defense under international law. The Nuremberg trials would later echo the same principle. Yet despite justice being served, the story of Ginny 2 remained largely unknown for decades. OSS files were classified, and the mission itself, deemed a failure, faded from public memory. Only in the 1980s were the men of Ginny 2 formally honored for their sacrifice. Their remains, recovered from shallow graves along the Italian coast, were reburied at the Florence American Cemetery under a shared monument that reads simply, "They served in silence." The mission's legacy endures not only as a lesson in the brutality of war, but also in the price of secrecy. The OSS had sent men into the shadows, trusting that courage alone could carry them through. Instead, they became victims of the very lawlessness they sought to defeat. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that in the chaos of global conflict, even the rules of war can dissolve into silence. But as the OSS looked eastward toward Asia, the terrain grew even deadlier. The next series of missions would unfold in the tangled jungles of Burma, where silence was not imposed by execution, but by nature itself. There, whole teams would vanish, consumed by the jungle's endless green. In the oppressive heat of Burma's jungles, where the air itself seemed to vibrate with insects and the threat of ambush, the men of OSS Detachment 101 fought a war unlike any other. It was a conflict waged in silence and shadows, where enemies were invisible, and death could come from disease as easily as from a bullet. The terrain was brutal. Dense bamboo, leeches, monsoon rains that turned trails into rivers. Yet for the operatives of the OSS, this was the front line of the secret war in Asia. Detachment 101 was the first OSS unit to take the field in the Pacific Theater. Formed in 1942 under the command of Colonel Karl Eifler, its mission was to organize guerrilla warfare behind Japanese lines in northern Burma. The goal was to disrupt enemy supply routes, sabotage communications, and pave the way for the Allied advance of General Joseph Stilwell's Chinese and American forces toward Myitkyina. From small beginnings, just a handful of officers and volunteers, it grew into a shadow army that eventually numbered thousands of Kachin tribesmen trained, supplied, and led by OSS field agents. The Kachins, fierce highland warriors loyal to neither Britain nor Japan, became invaluable allies. They knew every ridge, river, and jungle path. Guided by their knowledge, Detachment 101 turned the wilderness into a weapon. "We lived off the land," one operative recalled, "and we died by it too." Their bases were hidden deep in the hills, accessible only by air or by days of trekking through malaria-infested valleys. Supplies arrived by parachute, crates of food, rifles, explosives, and radios, each drop a lifeline in a sea of green. The OSS men, often young Americans barely out of college, were thrust into an environment for which no training could fully prepare them. Jungle rot, dysentery, and fever claimed almost as many as combat. Yet the results were extraordinary. By late 1944, Detachment 101 had blown hundreds of bridges, ambushed Japanese convoys, and rescued downed Allied airmen across the region. General Stilwell called them the most effective sabotage force in the war, but not every mission succeeded. As the network expanded, smaller teams were inserted deeper behind Japanese lines, sometimes hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly base. They operated alone with no guarantee of extraction. In late 1944, several of these patrols went silent. One was codenamed K Project, led by Lieutenant Charles "Red" Moffett, tasked with scouting Japanese troop concentrations near Bamo. The team's last radio message read, "Approaching river. Enemy movement heavy. Will transmit at dusk." The signal never came. Search flights spotted nothing. Weeks later, Kachin scouts found fragments of burned equipment along a jungle ridge, but no bodies. Another team vanished during the monsoon season, when entire villages were swallowed by floods and landslides. The jungle reclaimed everything. OSS headquarters recorded them as missing, presumed lost. The dense terrain ensured that, in many cases, there was simply no trace. "In Burma," one officer later said, "a man could disappear 5 feet from you and never be seen again." What made these disappearances even more haunting was the mystery surrounding them. Japanese patrols rarely ventured into certain areas known to be under Kachin control, leading some to suspect ambushes by rival tribes or even betrayal from within. Yet no clear answers ever emerged. The jungle kept its secrets. After the war, when British and American investigators combed the region, they found only rusted weapons, scraps of uniform, and the remains of half-buried parachutes. Despite these losses, Detachment 101's impact on the Burma campaign was enormous. Their intelligence guided Stilwell's advance toward Myit Kina, and their guerrilla operations tied down thousands of Japanese troops who might otherwise have reinforced the front. By the end of 1945, OSS records credited them with killing or capturing more than 5,400 enemy soldiers, an astounding achievement for such a small force. Yet few outside the intelligence community ever heard of their work. In a 1945 after-action report, the commanding officer of Detachment 101 wrote, "We fought a war unseen in a land that swallows evidence. Our men lie where they fell, unrecorded, unrecognized, but not forgotten." The report itself was classified for decades, its details hidden even from the families of the missing. Some of those families continued to hope for word long after the war's end, clinging to rumors of survivors living among the Kachins. None were ever found. When the OSS was disbanded in October 1945, Detachment 101's operations were absorbed into the newly formed Strategic Services Unit, a precursor to the CIA. The files of those lost patrols, K Project, and Tiger Team and Jungle Redens were quietly archived. Only in 1995, after declassification, did historians rediscover their names and stories. Today, in the hills of northern Myanmar, villagers still speak of strange Americans who fought in the jungle long ago, leaving behind coins, knives, and empty parachute crates. The rainforest has swallowed their trails, but local memory endures. To them, these OSS men are spirits of the hills, not in the supernatural sense, but as symbols of courage that still echo through the trees. Operation Ginny II had ended in execution and outrage. Detachment 101 ended in mystery and disappearance. Both shared a common fate, bravery consumed by silence. Yet even as the OSS faded into history, its final missions in Europe were already closing the chapter. As 1945 drew to an end and the war reached its final moments, dozens of OSS operatives vanished without trace in the chaos of retreat and surrender. Their stories would lie dormant for half a century, until the archives were opened once more to reveal the quiet cost of victory. By 1945, The war that had engulfed the world for 6 long years was ending in ruins and revelations. Berlin was in flames, Tokyo a smoldering plain, and across the globe, the silence of surrender replaced the thunder of war. But for the men and women of the Office of Strategic Services, the end brought neither closure nor peace. Dozens of OSS missions had simply vanished. Teams parachuted into occupied Europe, China, and Indochina who never reported back, their names erased from active rosters. In the official records, their status was summed up in 2 words: no contact. As the Allies celebrated victory, a handful of officers remained in dimly lit field stations in Paris, Rome, and Kunming, waiting for radios that would never transmit again. In one OSS report dated June 1945, a line appears with haunting brevity: Teams Falcon, Willow, and Drake, presumed lost. No explanation, no burial, just absence. The same intelligence network that had fueled Allied victories was now dissolving into the fog of post-war secrecy. Why these operations ended in silence is a question historians still struggle to answer. In some cases, the chaos of collapsing fronts swallowed them whole. Agents captured by retreating German units, or stranded behind new lines when Soviet and Allied zones shifted overnight. In others, it was the nature of clandestine work itself. Missions so secret that even their own command scarcely knew where they had gone. "We fought a war where forgetting was a strategy," one veteran later said. "Sometimes we erased ourselves." After the OSS was dissolved in October 1945, much of its paper trail was boxed, sealed, and stored. The CIA, created 2 years later, inherited both its legacy and its ghosts. Files marked Black Operations, Europe 1943-45, remained classified for decades. When portions were finally released under the Freedom of Information Act, they revealed chilling details. Unexplained crashes in the Alps, agents last seen boarding night transports in China, and reports of field caches found decades later containing personal effects, codebooks, and rusted sidearms. One of the most mysterious cases involved Operation Creek, a small OSS team inserted into Austria in April 1945 to contact anti-Nazi resistance units near Innsbruck. Their mission report stopped mid-page. The last entry, dated April 29th, read simply, "Moving south toward Brenner. Heavy snow. We'll signal tomorrow." No signal ever came. Decades later, mountaineers discovered remnants of a parachute and American-made radios high in the Karwendel Range. The team's fate remains unknown. Another unsolved disappearance occurred in the Pacific. OSS records mention a Burma to China courier flight that vanished in July 1945 with 3 intelligence officers aboard, carrying decoded Japanese surrender intercepts. The aircraft was never found. For families of those men, the silence became its own form of mourning, a grief with no grave, only the faint reassurance that their loved ones had done something vital, something secret. Even the surviving operatives carried the burden of secrecy for life. Bound by oath, they spoke little of what they had seen or done. Many went on to serve quietly in the CIA, their wartime experiences locked away behind classified walls. "Our medals were invisible," one OSS veteran said. "You couldn't wear what no one was supposed to know about." When historians finally gained access to the OSS archives in the 1980s, they found not only mission reports but letters, personal, handwritten notes never meant for publication. One such letter, from an agent lost in France, ends with a line that captures the spirit of those silent warriors. "If we do not return, remember that we walked willingly into the dark." The legacy of these vanished missions extends beyond the battlefield. They reshaped how modern intelligence operates, teaching hard lessons about communication, coordination, and the human cost of secrecy. The OSS's clandestine culture, the blend of heroism and quiet tragedy, became the foundation for America's post-war intelligence apparatus. But with it came a new question. How much of victory depends on what is never spoken? Today, the descendants of those lost agents still search for traces of their relatives. Some comb archives in Washington and London, others journey to remote corners of Europe and Asia, guided by fragments of declassified maps. In Norway, melted glaciers have revealed wreckage from Operation Ripe. In Italy, locals still light candles at the beach where the men of Ginny the Song were executed. And in the hills of Myanmar, villagers tell of American spirits who once fought the Japanese and vanished into the jungle. History, it seems, refuses to let silence have the final word. For every grand victory of World War II, there were untold smaller ones, won by those who worked unseen, who left no parade, no record, and sometimes no return. Their missions ended not with the clash of armies, but with the whisper of a dying radio signal, fading into static over thousands of miles. As we look back, their absence forms part of the true cost of the war, the price paid by those who lived and died in secrecy. Their courage ensured that history could move forward, even if their names were left behind. The story of the OSS is one of triumph shadowed by tragedy. Its operatives shaped the modern world, but did so from the margins, in the places history prefers to forget. Their operations, Ripe, Sussex, Ginny 2, Detachment 101, and so many others, ended in silence, but not in vain. The echo of their sacrifice still lingers, carried on the static of forgotten frequencies, calling out from the hidden corners of World War II. In the end, perhaps that is the truest legacy of the OSS: to serve unseen, to disappear for the sake of victory, and to remind us that even silence can speak of courage.